GB News are outraged at Greenpeace activists doing a banner drop at Rishi Sunak's Yorkshire home. And in response, one of their journalists, he's called Ben Leo, has stormed Greenpeace's London office.
Who thinks Sunak's house invasion was a good idea? Anyone? What team do you guys work in? Are you press? Marketing? Who's the gigabrain that invented that idea today? And also, why don't you do it in China? Go to President Xi Jinping's house. Do you think you get the same reception? No? No answers. Nothing to say, just smirks. Just sullen smirks. You're paid 100 grand a year for ideas like that. Are you going to apologise for what you've done today?
What should I apologise for?
For turning up at not just the Prime Minister's house, a private man's home where he lives with his family. Doesn't matter.
Speak,
does it?
I will answer your
Speak.
question. Yeah.
Defend it.
Yeah, it was a peaceful protest, and the Prime Minister has allowed hundreds of new oil and gas licences.
So you think it's justified turning up to a man's private home where he lives with his family because he's approved oil and gas licences?
He wasn't there. That was a matter of national news. We checked before going. We made sure there was nobody there. It was planned with utmost care, with care for security. He wasn't there. We knocked on the door. First, there was no answer.
You knocked on the door, so you jumped on his roof. Is that right?
We knocked on the door to identify who we were.
Are you going to apologise?
No, I'm not going to apologise. We held him to account for a decision that he has backed, which is a disastrous decision.
Do you know what percent of global emissions the UK is responsible for? You must do. You're paid 100k a year, so you must know.
I mean, it's around 1%, 2%.
All right, okay. So why aren't you going to China, to Xi Jinping's palace, and doing this?
We have an enormous campaigning organisation in China. Greenpeace are really present in China. We do tons of work there. Do some research.
Aren't you a bunch of hypocrites? Is that right? Is that what's going on there?
Why? What's happened now?
Yeah, what's hypocritical?
Why would that come up?
Because you're choosing to make a point here in the UK that somehow this country is not doing its fair share to reduce emissions.
GB News was really into painting the UK as a global leader. The UK has a massive...
It is on carbon emissions.
It's a massive financial...
40% reduction over the past 2 decades that you guys think is acceptable.
And we
you
have
guys
lost
think it's
that.
acceptable to invade a private man's family home, which is disgusting.
I can see why GB News made the decision to do that, because it would have been difficult for Greenpeace to say, we haven't invited you and get out, because obviously Greenpeace climbed on Rishi Sunak's roof without having permission. I did think that the Greenpeace staff, comported themselves very well. I thought those were very effective answers from the joint directors of Greenpeace UK, especially on China. Now, we hear this so often. You've got people saying, oh, Britain is only 1% of global emissions. Why should we bother to reduce them? Well, because we're less than 1% of the population as well, right? If you say no one who's not in a huge country should do anything for climate, then I don't think that's a way to build any kind of global cooperation on this. And it would backfire. I mean, it's kind of an argument to say that we should have no morality whatsoever because I'm just one person. Who cares what I do? I'm just one person, not going to have that much of an impact. I might as well do whatever the hell I want. I mean, maybe that is the ethical code by which people who work for GB News live by, but I don't think it's one that we should be encouraging everyone else to. Aaron, what did you make of that reporting sort of? I mean, I know GB News seemed very pleased with what they got out of it, but I mean, what did you make of it?
It wasn't reporting. It was direct. It was a direct action. What Greenpeace did was a direct action. What they've done is a direct action. And like you say, right at the top there, Michael. Well, if Greenpeace can, sort of effectively, it was aggravated trespass. You're asked to leave, you stay there, which is a criminal offence, by the way. I'm not suggesting that happened there yesterday, but it's tantamount to aggravated trespass. And GB News' line would have been, well, they did it, so why can't we? That's fine. They're a campaigning organisation. You're the media. It's a tacit recognition that you're also a campaigning organisation, right? It didn't strike me as journalism. If Novara Media went into a right-wing think tank's offices in central London and behaved like that, we would be cancelled, we would be lambasted, derided, mocked by every politician from every major party and every TV network and every single newspaper. We would be, okay? That's the first thing. Secondly, Michael, on the point of China, so babyish. Grow up. This whole thing of, oh, well, we're only one country, 1% of the global population. This is called the collective action problem. Why should I do something if everybody else isn't going to do it? Okay? And I won't make any difference. Well, this is like saying, why should you vote? You're one of 45 million people that can vote in a general election. Why would you vote? What's the rational reason to vote? Why would you do it? One vote's not going to make any difference. No constituency is going to be decided by a single vote. Maybe there's a record of it somewhere, but it's not a single vote, I don't think. Maybe the tens of votes, but not a single vote, so why bother? There is no, given that logic, rational explanation or reason or motive to vote. But people do all the time. Tens of millions of people vote every year, practically, whether it's local elections or assembly elections or general elections or previously European elections. People vote all the time. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Well, it's because people feel there's an obligation to do the right thing. And it's the same with regards to climate change. We should pull our weight. Now, we then move on to an argument of, is China pulling its weight? Well, right now, China has generation coming from solar in regards to coal of a ratio about 2-1. Now, that might not sound like much, but China's solar capacity is increasing by around 33% every year. It is a global leader in solar, wind, nuclear, geothermal, storage, everything. It's blowing everyone out of the water, everyone. It's blowing often in terms of yearly additional capacity. It's often blowing out the EU and the US combined, okay, in creating new capacity for wind and solar, particularly wind. So it's pretty obvious China is actually doing pretty well. There was a report out last month how actually, with regards to renewables, it was 5 years ahead of schedule. Now, I'm not here to kiss the butt of Xi Jinping or China. That's irrelevant. The facts are the facts. When it comes to nuclear, renewable, and decarbonizing, they're doing remarkably well. And the idea that, why don't you go protest in Xi Jinping's house? First of all, China's not a democracy, you nimwit. Okay, so generally speaking, protest only works in countries where politicians feel they have to be answerable to the electorate. That's a good thing. You can't, on the one hand, say that China is this authoritarian, dictatorial state. Nobody has the right to protest, and then say, hey, why don't you go protest in China? It doesn't make any sense. Please try and get more than 10 of those brain cells buzzing at any one point. And then we go back to last week. You might remember this story, Michael. You had Ian Duncan Smith going on the TV saying, we have a huge problem, people. We have a huge problem. China's going to make electric vehicles too cheap. That's the problem. They're too good at creating mass market, low carbon vehicles. They're too good. We're going to have too many of them. We're going to be reliable on their technology. So which is it? Is China this failure, this carbon bad guy? And apparently people should do a direct action at Xi Jinping's house, the Forbidden Palace, presumably, in Beijing. Good luck with that one. Or is China producing too many electric vehicles too quickly? And it's going to capture too much of the market? I really do feel sorry for conservatives in this country, Michael, because on issue after issue after issue, they talk complete fucking nonsense. They say things which are wildly contrasting and contradictory from day to day, not even day to day. News cycle to news cycle, 8-hour periods. They can say things which are diametrically opposed. How is it possible to hold so many contradictions in one brain? This is a topic for a future show, perhaps.
The issue of China and climate is super interesting. I mean, as far as I understand it, they do now have per capita emissions which are higher than the UK, even if you sort of take into account the fact that they're exporting lots of those emissions in the sense that they make manufacturing goods that we then might import. That's mainly because their electricity grid is still predominantly reliant on coal. So that's the sort of bad element of China when it comes to climate change. The good element is that they have, as you say, Aaron, massively increased capacity when it comes to renewables and massively reduced the price of renewables, which actually helps everyone else in terms of rolling out solar and wind, because it's the mass production in China and the economies of scale that have made it affordable for everyone else. We are potentially, though, speaking at a level which is a little bit too sophisticated for Ben Leo, who was the journalist who stormed Greenpeace's offices. We've been having somewhat of a nuanced debate here about climate responsibility. Ben Leo isn't a particularly nuanced guy. In fact, he probably should have hung around at Greenpeace for a pretty basic lesson on climate change. Now, these are a selection of his tweets, all from the past years. This is not ancient history. Ben Leo, if you want to call all of Europe the North Atlantic and US regional, then okay. Climate change is a scam. You've been duped. So climate change is a scam. Then you've got here sharing a headline from The Guardian, climate crisis linked to heat wave fires undeniable, say scientists. And he says 97% of climate scientists agree they don't want to be defunded. So in response to how come if climate change isn't real, all climate scientists disagree with you, he thinks that's a conspiracy. And then you've got here, you can't tackle climate change. The climate changes and has done for thousands of years. Oh my God. And then Extinction Rebellion to stop harassing the public because no one's listening. Might it be due to the fact Arctic summer ice stopped melting a decade ago and more people than ever before don't believe the man-made climate change hysteria? More people than ever don't believe the man-made climate change hysteria. Now, a huge, huge majority of the public believe that climate change is happening, it's man-made, and it's a serious problem. Now, there is this real backlash from the likes of GB News who are trying to polarize this issue in the same way that it is polarized in the United States. I think it's very troubling. Aaron, what does it tell us that someone with these views about climate change is now positioning himself as a leading reporter at GB News?
Well, it's a free country. I mean, he can be a reporter if he wants to be. I'm not going to say that you have to have certain views in order to be a political reporter. But what's super interesting, Michael, is that the first tweet you showed there was from 2022. Okay? So we're not talking about tweets from 10, 15 years ago. Outright climate denial, right? Climate change doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's merely a repeat of the kind of processes and fluctuations we've seen preceding, human civilization, which is true. The climate has always changed. The point with anthropogenic or human man-made climate change is the fact that it's happening incredibly quickly, and very soon we're going to see deeply traumatic and troubling consequences, if not for ourselves, then following generations. We're talking really in terms of decades and centuries, not millennia here, okay? And generally speaking, when you're talking about, the Holocene, for instance, which is a certain geological and sort of climatic systems period, you're talking about, 10, 15,000 years. We're talking this century of climate warming, of a couple of degrees, rising sea levels, whatnot. So to be clear, climate change is real. Man-made climate change is real. Almost everybody agrees with that. And what's interesting, Michael, is the change in shtick from this guy, right? So in those tweets a year ago, he's saying it doesn't exist. And now he's saying, well, we do our bit. Why don't you go protest in China? Which one is it? Which one is it? And that, for me, is really interesting. Because actually, that why don't you go protest in China is a de facto recognition that, okay, anthropogenic climate change is happening. Okay, there is climate warming. Okay, there will be political consequences. But rather than say, I was wrong about saying it's all a scam, a lot of these people are now saying, okay, it exists, but we can't do anything about it, sadly. So there's a new grift. There's a new climate denial grift in town, which is you move away from outright denial, which has absolutely no basis in scientific fact, zero. And you move instead to a more political argument, which is, well, we're only 65 million people. We're 1% of the global planet's CO2 emissions. So, what can you do? Only China and the US can really do anything, which again is kind of dumb, right? Because realistically, Chinese per capita CO2 emissions are probably going to peak in the next 10 to 15 years. And then you're going to see growing CO2 emissions from, countries in sub-Saharan Africa because their populations will be growing. So the idea that even any one country can sort this out is clearly nonsensical. Clearly, you need a global coordinated effort, which, yes, includes countries like the UK. It is troubling that somebody like him is reporting on this issue. We like fact-based reporting here at Novara Media. I personally think it's good to have a very broad range of views in legacy media. I think what we have with just the BBC being 80, 90% of news market share, I think that's bad. I think it's unhealthy. And I think it's legitimate for there to be climate skeptics in the public realm. Of course I do. But this chap is not interested in the scientific method. He's not interested in scientific, rational, reasonable deliberation and debate. He's clearly not open to persuasion. And the fact he's moved from one grift of outright denial to another where we can't do anything suggests he's more of a campaigner than a political journalist. Now, to an extent, lots of people in the media are campaigners. I'm a campaigner. You're a campaigner. We say that. Okay, I will say here on Novara Media, it's 6:45 here on Friday evening. I believe in climate change. I think that politically it's one of the most urgent, pressing issues of the 21st century. Now, if this gentleman, this Ben guy at GB News, before all that reporting said, I think climate change is a scam, by the way, here's my reporting, I think that's probably quite useful context.